Great. So let me also increase the volume. Okay, now let's get started. Let's do a quick recap of what we have done so far and then move forward from here, right? So within Keynesian cross, there are two important concepts related to Keynesian cross that you need to know, right? And one is accelerator effect and the other one is multiplier effect. So we did talk about the multiplier effect yesterday a little bit, right? But there can be some confusions, and I would answer those questions or any confusions that there are, right? Okay, so multiplier effect, and so both of these two are related to Keynesian cross, multiplier effect and accelerator effect, right? So let's first talk about multiplier effect. So Keynesian cross, we know by now that it's a diagram, it's a graph that explains or predicts the GDP of a country, right? So Keynesian cross is a graph, it's a model that predicts the GDP of a country, the output, national output, right? Which is also known as GDP, right? And then within that, we saw that this is how the Keynesian cross graph looks like. So you have two curves on that. On the y-axis, you have aggregate expenditure of the country, right? And then on the x-axis, you have nominal GDP, right? So let me make the diagram again so that everything is clear, right? So aggregate expenditure on the y-axis and nominal GDP, which is also known, which we also represent through y, is on the x-axis, right? Now, first thing that you need to draw is an upward sloping line of aggregate expenditure. So aggregate expenditure is upward sloping line, but it starts with y-intercept. We know this, right? Why is it starting from, why does it has y-intercept? Because this y-intercept is made up of all the autonomous components, or this y-intercept of aggregate expenditure is made up of all the autonomous components, right? Which includes autonomous consumption, autonomous investment, autonomous government spending, autonomous exports, and autonomous imports, right? Autonomous, we already know by now that autonomous is any component of that thing which is not dependent on income, right? So if you remember, we talked about this, we said that for every component of aggregate expenditure, we will divide that in two parts. So one would be autonomous. So giving you an example for consumption, right? So in consumption, you would have autonomous and induced. Autonomous, sometimes I get confused with the spellings, right? Autonomous, which doesn't depend on the income, national income of the country, and induced is the one that does depend on the GDP of a country, national output, right? So this is the main distinction between the two. Okay, now this being said, we need to draw another curve on this graph to determine the equilibrium level of GDP. To determine the equilibrium level of GDP, we need to draw another line curve on this graph, right? And that is x is equals to y line. The x is equals to y line. So what's the significance of this x is equals to y line? So we have talked about this in detail, that x is equals to y line shows all the points where the y variable values, which is aggregate expenditure, are equal to the x-axis variable values, right? So this green line, which is labeled as x equals y, is showing you all possible points where the values of the two variables on the x and y axis are the same, right? And where this x equals y line intersect with the aggregate expenditure line, that is where the equilibrium of an economy will be, right? So you can see it yourself that aggregate expenditure, the orange line is intersecting with the green line at this point. So this will be your equilibrium level of GDP. This will be your equilibrium level of GDP, right? Then we talked about in the yesterday's class, and this is important, right? So we said what happens when any of these autonomous components increase. So if any of these autonomous components increase, how would your GDP change, right? And do ask me if there's any question. So think about this. So let's say the investment in an economy is increasing, right? So let's say now there's more investment being made in the economy, right? So then what would happen, right? So I'm a little short of space over here, so forgive me for that, right? So let's say this is how it looks like, right? Or let's say this is how it will look like. Okay, so think about this. When any of your autonomous components increase, especially the injections, which includes investment, government spending, and export. So when there is increase in your injections in the economy, what happens? Your aggregate expenditure line will shift upwards. Your aggregate expenditure line will shift upwards, right? And the new equilibrium would be at this point, The new equilibrium would be at this point, right? Now you bring the dotted line down, and you see where the new level of GDP would be. You see where the new level of GDP would be, right? So this is what I've just shown on the graph. This is your multiplier effect, right? So what is multiplier effect? Let's do a quick recap. So multiplier effect says that increase in injections like investment, government spending, or exports. Increase in injections in the economy will result in more than proportionate change in the GDP, right? So if you remember, we also looked at the two formulas of multiplier effect that we're just about to recap. So multiplier effect can be calculated through two formulas, right? And do ask me if there's any confusion, right? So change in GDP, right, divided by change in injection, right? So injection can be one of the three types. Either it will be investment, or it will be government spending, or it will be export. So let's look at an example. So the example that we were discussing yesterday, that if an economy increases its injection by 100 million, and corresponding to that 100 million, there is 200 million increase in the GDP, this means that your multiplier effect was 2. This means that your multiplier effect was 2. Does it make sense? Right? So change in GDP due to change in injection, right? And this is what it means. More than proportionate ka kya matlab hota hai? More than proportionate means that whatever increase in the denominator is, the numerator value will increase more than that. The numerator value will increase more than that. So if there's any confusion so far, please ask me, right? Is it making sense? This is the first formula. Yeah, Riba. So this is one of the two formulas, right? So I've just written the first one now. Now let's move on and talk about the second one that we discussed. Right? Another way to calculate the multiplier effect would be 1 divided by 3 types of leakages from the economy. I repeat. So another way to calculate the multiplier effect is 1 divided by the 3 leakages, 3 possible leakages from the circular flow of income. Now, if you remember in the circular flow of income diagram, in that we identified that there can be 3 leakages from the economy, which includes your marginal propensity to save. So if you're saving any money in the economy, or it could be your marginal rate of taxation. When the government takes taxation, that is, when the government takes taxes, that would be what? That would be leakage from the economy. Are you getting? Right? So that would be leakage. So someone is not on mute. May I request you to put yourself on the mute, right? Okay, so thank you so much. Okay, now moving forward, right? So another thing can be the tax rate, right? So when the government takes taxes, that is also leakage from the economy. And last of all is marginal propensity to import. Now, what is MPM? Marginal propensity to import is any additional income that you spend on imports. Any additional income that you spend on imports, right? Taxation, saving, and import. Very good, Bob. That's absolutely correct. Okay. Now let's look at the formulas. If you're still a little confused that what each of these values or variables is showing you, right? So marginal propensity to save shows change in savings. That calculates basically how much will be the change in savings due to change in savings due to change in income, right? So if someone's income increases by, let's say, $100, out of that additional $100, what amount will they save, like $40 or $50 or $60? That will be their marginal propensity to save. Can we do an example of second formula? We can, totally we can, right, Rabab? Let me explain this first and we will definitely do an example, right? Now, the second variable here is marginal rate of taxation. Now, what is marginal rate of taxation? Now, let me get rid of this, right? Marginal rate of taxation is the proportion of additional income that government taxes. The proportion of additional income that government taxes, that is your marginal rate of taxation, right? So let me write down the formula for you. How much will be the change in taxes in an economy? How much will be the change in taxes in an economy due to change in income? That is your marginal rate of taxation. That is your marginal rate of taxation. And last of all is marginal propensity to import. Marginal propensity to import means how much will be the change in imports, right? Or simply speaking, what proportion of the additional income would someone spend on imports, right? And import is also leakage. We know that import is also leakage. Why? Because that is not the money spent on your local goods. So leakage is anything that goes out of your system, right? Out of your circular flow of income, right? And imports are not the products that are produced in your own home country. In fact, these are the products that you that are produced in some other country, right? Foreign country. So that's why it's a leakage. Does it make sense? Is everyone clear on this? Right. So these are the three possible leakages that can take place in an economy: marginal propensity to save, marginal rate of taxation, and marginal propensity to import. Right. Now let's do an example. I think the first formula is pretty simple and obvious: change in GDP divided by change in injection. But the second one is causing some confusion. So let's do a real, some mathematical example so that we get more clear on this. Right. So have a look at this. Okay, now let's assume you have an economy has marginal propensity to save of 0.2. Right, first of all, tell me, what does 0.2 show? What does marginal propensity to save of 0.2 means? Now, what does this mean? Can you tell me theoretically, like what does this show? If the marginal propensity to save is 0.2, it means right. It means that 20% of additional income, right? So 0.2 is basically how much? 20%, right? So if you multiply this by 100, this will be 20%. So 20% of your additional income you save, right? Additional income, yeah, that's correct, Elishma, but be careful that it's additional income, because whenever we use the word change, this delta is showing you the change in income, change in savings over change in income. So this is what it shows us, right? So every every additional dollar, you save 20 cents from that and you spend the remaining 80 cents, right? This is what it shows. Okay, now moving forward, marginal rate of taxation. So the marginal rate of taxation in an economy, MRT, right, is equal to, let's say, 0.3. This means that out of every additional dollar that someone earns, government takes 30% of that additional income in taxes, right? So government takes 30% of that additional income that someone generates in the form of taxes, right? That is what this shows. And the last of all is marginal propensity to import. And if that is equals to 0.1, this means that out of one additional dollar, out of every one additional dollar that the person earns, 10% of that is spent on, meaning 10 cents of that is spent on imports, right? So these are the products that are not produced in your own home country, right? So these are the products that you buy from another country. That's what it is, right? Okay, now this being said, so you will be provided on the MCQ questions, you will be provided the values of these three variables, right? Now what you need to do is to calculate the multiplier effect. Can you calculate the multiplier effect for me? Right. Can you calculate the multiplier effect for me? Yeah. Students, simple. So it's just simple calculation, right? From additional income, 40% is vested in an economy. Just a second. From additional income, 40% is invested in an economy. Yes, 0.5. Yeah. Or another way to put this, Elishba, is that, yeah, 40% of that additional income stays within the economy. 40% of that additional income that is being generated stays within the economy, right? It doesn't, there's no leakage for that. If you add up all the leakages, right? So how I'm saying that 40% of additional income stays within the economy, because if you add these values up, the three leakages over here, so 0.2, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.1, that gives you a total of how much? 0.6. This means if 0.6, which is 60%, if that is leakage from the economy, then how much is staying within the economy? The remaining 40%. As simple as that. The remaining 40% stays in the economy, right? So what you are supposed to do is simply divide one divided by the sum of these three values. The sum of these three values, which turns out to be 0.6, right? So that gives you whatever the answer is. You will just write this down, and that will be your multiplier effect. So 1 divided by 0.6 is how much? Let me quickly do that. It should be something 1 point something, right? So this gives you 1 divided by 0.6. This gives you 1.67, right? And you just take the reciprocal, so 1.7, sorry, right? Does it make sense? 1.67, great, perfect, right? So this means if the multiplier effect is, now this is a very important part, so I will, explain this in more detail. So if multiplier effect is 1.67, what does that mean? What does that mean? That for every one additional dollar of injection, which can be investment, which can be government spending, which can be exports, your GDP will overall increase by how much? And the multiplier effect, students, are you getting my question? So if the multiplier effect is 1.67, then what it actually shows is that for every $1 invested in the economy, or for every $1 increase in injections in the economy, there will be $1.67 increase in the GDP of the country. How many of you are getting this? How many of you are getting this? Now let's do another example so that the difference becomes more obvious to you, right? So now let's say that these are the values of leakages, right? So let's calculate the multiplier effect again using these values, right? So then do you expect the multiplier effect to be bigger or smaller? If you use, very good, Elishma. So if you use these values of the three leakages over here, these three values, right? So would you expect the multiplier effect to be bigger or smaller? And if you can tell me the reason for that. So you would expect the multiplier effect to be, come on. So just look at the values, just do the sum. Do the sum, right? So 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.35. So if now you're dividing 1 over 0.35, whereas previously it was 0.6, obviously your multiplier effect will be bigger, right? It will be bigger and it turns out to be 0.8, right? Sorry, 2.8, which means that for every $1 increase in injection, there will be $2.8 increase in GDP. There will be $2.8 increase in GDP. How many of you got this? Is this clear? Is this making sense? Right? Is everyone clear on this? Right? So this is what you need to know as far as the multiplier effect is concerned, right? Arba, is this clear? Okay, now we'll move a little forward and we'll talk about accelerator effect, right? Now we'll move forward and we'll talk about accelerator effect. Now, what is accelerator effect? Now, this is very interesting. Because a lot of students get confused over here because multiplier effect is technically the complete opposite. So far, what we have discussed in the multiplier effect says that increase in injection results in increase in GDP. Increase in injections results in increase in GDP. Now, accelerator effect says the opposite. It says that increase in GDP will result in increase in investment. Right. Now, let's first understand the concept theoretically and then move forward, right? So multiplier effect, I always like to make this thing because that would be easier for you to understand. So multiplier effect said, have a look at this, that we have just discussed. Change in injections, like increase in injections, would result in increase in GDP, right? Increase in injections would result in increase in GDP. Does it make sense? Right? So is everyone clear on this? Right? Okay. Now, this is what the multiplier effect says. On the other hand, accelerator effect says that increase in GDP, right? Increase in GDP would result in increase in investment. Now, let me explain you this second part. This is known as accelerator effect. This part is known as accelerator effect. This part, right? So this part is known as accelerator effect, right? That we're about to just discuss right now. And the previous part is multiplier effect, right? So this one was your multiplier effect, right? Is this making sense? Okay. So think about this. When the GDP, now let's look at the accelerator effect, right? So when your country's GDP is increasing, right? What does that show? That means that the people, right? That the people are consuming more, right? So the people are consuming more. That's why the GDP is increasing, right? We know that GDP increases because there's more aggregate demand, right? There's more production taking place because there's more demand and so on and so forth. Now, to meet that increasing demand in the economy, the companies need to invest more. They want to expand their potential. They want to expand their production potential. They want to expand their operations. And that means making more investment in resources, making more investment in capital, and so on and so forth. Are you getting me? So this relationship also holds true. This accelerator effect also holds true. Why? Because if the country's GDP is increasing, which means now there's more economic activity taking place, there are more goods and services being produced. So as the result of this higher economic activity, there is more investment being made by firms because they want to meet that increased demand from consumers. How many of you are clear on this? How many of you are clear on this, right? So the multiplier effect says that increase in injection would result in more than proportionate change in GDP. Have a look at this. Multiplier effect says, so let me not write down the full form, I'll just write ME. Multiplier effect says change in injection would result in more than proportionate change in GDP. Change in injection, right, would result in more than proportionate change in GDP, more than right? Is it making sense? And accelerator effect says that change in GDP would result in more than proportionate change in investment. Change in GDP would result in more than proportionate change in investment. More than change in investment. Does it make sense? Are things more clear now? Right. Are you guys clear on this or not? Right? Okay, very good. Excellent, right? So do remember that both of these two effects hold true. Both of these two effects hold true, right? That on one end, injections are causing a change in GDP. So this is the direction of, change. First, injection change, and then they cause a change in the GDP. But then this doesn't stop over here. Once the GDP has increased, it also increases the investment again, right? So you can think about this, that it is a circle. It's a circle where you invest initially more, right? And that causes your GDP to rise. And then that higher GDP causes your investment to rise even further. So this is how it goes, right? Does it make sense? Okay. Now this brings us towards the completion of this topic. And let me share that, in fact, in tomorrow's class, I can bring some, in fact, that will be very helpful. I'll bring some essay questions, actual essay questions that, from the past papers that are related to this topic so that we can practice and so on. And I will also try to bring some MCQs so that you get a better idea of what type of questions are asked from the exam related to this topic, right? But you'll see that those are not very difficult, right? And then as far as the syllabus is concerned, so let's quickly discuss what other topics we are left with. So one major topic that we are left with in A2 is growth versus economic development. So that's a very important topic and also very important from the exam point of view. So on every year you'll see at least one essay question. Normally it's one, right? So you'll see one essay question related to the topic of growth and development, because it's a very important topic, right? So that is one thing that we're left with. And then we are left with few other smaller concepts, which includes the credit multiplier. Credit multiplier is basically about how the banks operate, right? How they issue. This is a very interesting topic and we'll talk more about it, right? So credit multiplier explains how the banks operate, how they generate, how they affect the money supply of an economy by issuing loans and so on and so forth, right? So that's another very interesting topic that we'll talk about. So we have credit multiplier, this one, right? Employment and unemployment. What is zero sum game? Okay, let me tell you. Let me answer your question, Lishma, right? And then we are also left with, as Lishma said, that is employment and unemployment, right? So employment and unemployment, right? So in this, it's a very simple, straightforward concept in which we'll talk about what are different causes of unemployment and what are possible solutions to each of those types of unemployment, right? So very simply, to give you an idea, so one type of unemployment is seasonal unemployment, right? When there are a few industries that have seasonal demand, right? And then if anyone is seasonally unemployed, then what can the government do? How can government accommodate them in different industries and so on? So these are all the things that we'll talk about in the topic of unemployment. Okay, now to answer your question, Lishba, zero sum game is when one person's benefit is another person's loss, right? So think about this. Let me give you an example. So when one person's benefit is another person's loss, that is zero sum game, right? And basically, let me give you an example around that. So if you think of right, so right. So if you think of, let's say what should be a good example? If you think about the oligopoly markets that we talked about, right? Excuse me, right? So the oligopoly markets example that we talked about, if you remember that example, in that example, we discussed how, one firm benefits, at the expense of another firm if one firm is reducing the price, but the other firm is not reducing the price. So let me quickly show you again over here that what we talked about in that, right? So think about this. So this is your payoff matrix that we made while we were discussing oligopoly, right? So the way it happens is, let's say there are two companies, right? So there are two companies, Shell and PSO, or any of the two companies that we want to think about, right? So let's say you have Shell on this side and you have PSO. We know that both of these two companies sell oil in Pakistan and so on, right? Okay, now in this example, we talked about that there are two options available to every firm. Either the company can increase the price of its product or it can decrease the price, right? Or better example in this case would not be to think about oil companies, because most of the times oil prices are fixed by the government. So how about we think about telcos, right? So let's say you have Telenor, that is one major player of telecommunication industry in Pakistan, and let's think about another company that is Ufone, right? Okay, now both of these two companies have two options. Either they can increase the price of their products or they can decrease the price, right? So these are the two options available to both the companies. Similarly, Telenor also has two options, either to increase the price or to reduce the price of its product, right? Now, if you remember, in this situation, which of the two companies will benefit? In this situation, in this box, what is this box actually representing you? So this box shows that Telenor is increasing the price and Ufone is reducing the price. Now, if you can explain me what would happen in this case. So in this case, Telenor customers are expected to switch to Ufone, right? Assuming that the services are quite similar. So what would people do? People respond to incentives, price incentives, discounts, and so on, right? So if Telenor is charging more and Ufone is charging less, so some of Telenor's customers will switch to Ufone, which means that in this case, the profit earned by Telenor would be lower compared to the profit earned by Ufone. So 5,20 shows that $5 million is the profit for Telenor, and 20 shows that it's 20 million or whatever, billion or whatever, right? It's the profit for the other company, which is Ufone. Does make sense? Right? So zero sum game. So one person's benefit is another person's loss, because when you are a competitor, right? Are you getting me? So when you're a competitor, so if one player, one organization is winning, then it would definitely cause a harm to another company. Because are you getting me how I'm looking at it? Right? So that is how it goes. So another example, if I'm thinking with that way, there are two major players, right? Any company, right? So if let's say Noon and Mega Lecture, right? So let's say if there's Noon and Mega Lecture, which are two big players in the education industry of Pakistan. So if there are more students going to Noon, then this means that we are on the losing end, because, right? And on the other hand, if more students are coming to Mega Lecture, then Noon is on the losing end, and so on. Section B solve हो जाता है, लेकिन case studies में marks नहीं आते. Right. So think about this. Elishba, are you checking the marking schemes as well? So when you do a case study, do you cross-check your answers with the marking scheme? And how do you know that you're not getting good marks? Is because your answers are very different from the ones in the market? Okay, you do check. By the end of September, yes, that's the target. Yes, that's the target above. Development or growth वाला topic हमें थोड़ी सी classes लेगा, but it should not take us more than 4 or 5 classes. And as far as the other topics are concerned, again, they will take maximum 2-3 classes. So we, inshallah, will be done by end of September, easily. Okay, Elishma, so let's do it like this. It will be difficult, but think about this. So case studies first thing that you need to know about case studies, which you would have already seen by now from the practice that you have done, that the case studies can be related to any topic, and you have to read very carefully through the passage to identify what is happening actually, and then answer the questions accordingly, right? So whatever question is asked on the case study, you have to answer it very briefly to the point and exactly answering what the question is saying, right? Unlike essay questions where you can you can talk more about other things. If it asks, if let's say an essay question asks about labor market, you can start with what is demand for labor, what is supply for labor, even if the question is about wage differential. So you can't explain wage differential without explaining what is demand and supply for labor. But as far as the case study questions are concerned, you have to be very much to the point, right? So that's one thing. So after we are done, so what we can do is, as soon as we're done with the syllabus, so we'll start off our practice first with case study questions, and then we can move to essay questions. Does this sound like a plan? Right? So this is what we can do. Okay, now let's keep moving. Let's keep moving, students. Right? So let's start off with right. So I mean, we can start off with any of the topics, right? But if we go according to the sequence, then it will be the credit multiplier thing that we have to do. But let's do unemployment, and because that's a more simpler topic, right? So what are the causes of unemployment? So let's talk about that first. It should not take us more than 2 classes, and then we can move to credit multiplier, and in the end we can do the growth and the development concept. Okay, now we already know what is unemployment, right? So unemployment is basically, right, we are starting unemployment. Yes, Adva. So unemployment is, and tomorrow we'll do some practice of the Keynesian cross questions, right? So unemployment, who is unemployed? So we talk about a person who is unemployed. That would be any person who is willing and able to work, right? So there are 2 things that are important: who is willing and able to work, right? And is looking for work as well. Willing and able to work, right? And I will tell you why is looking for work an important condition over here. Anyone, right, who is willing and able to work, right? Who is willing and able to work and is looking for work but could not find a job, right? For work but could not find a job, right? So this is what defines someone who is unemployed. Now, to better understand this, right, come aate hain. Essay question mein I just said that very rare. It's very rare that you will see an essay question on the multiplier or the accelerator effect. Even if there is a question, they merge this concept with some other concept, right? And I'll bring you some couple of examples in tomorrow's class. But MCQs, yes, every exam you'll see 3-4 MCQs, or at least 2-3 MCQs related to multiplier and accelerator, right? Okay, so is everyone clear on this? So how do we define the term unemployed? Unemployed is a person who is willing, like who wants to work, is able to work, like they are mentally and physically not, they are mentally and physically fit enough to work, any type of work, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be, so let's say I can't work as a doctor, right? Because I don't have the necessary qualifications for that. But as long as I'm mentally and physically fine, then I am able to work because I should be able to find something, right? And is looking for work. Now, this is also very important. So why is this third condition important? Because there are some people who claim, especially in developed countries where you get unemployment benefits. So a lot of people have incentives to claim that they are looking, like, they have incentives to claim that they are unemployed, whereas in reality, they're not, because they're not even actively looking for work, right? So there are 3 conditions that are important for, for you to identify if someone is really unemployed or not. That person should be willing and able to work and is looking for work. And still, if they can't find a work, then they would be defined as unemployed. Okay, now moving forward, in this case, it's important to understand how the population of a country, that's not directly related to A2 syllabus, but that always helps to understand that how do we divide people in different categories, and where and among all these different categories, where the where the unemployed people lie, right? So we can call this as population distribution, right? So let's try to distribute the population of a country in different categories. Population distribution, right? Okay, now have a look at this, right? So the entire population of a country is first of all divided in three categories, right? So one segment, the first group is people who are below the working age, below the minimum working age, right? So you can also call them minors, right? So these are the people who are not allowed to, I mean, kids, you can say. These are the kids who are not allowed to work in Pakistan, right? Or in any country, depending on which country we're looking at, right? So in Pakistan, by the way, this might be a little surprising for you. This is the minimum legal age at which someone can work is 14, right? Unlike a lot of other countries where the minimum, I don't know, I would need to check, but for the longest, I thought that the legal minimum age in any country to work is 18, but in Pakistan it's 14 years, right? So this might come as a surprise to some of you, right? So these are minors below the legal minimum age to work. Then comes in adult population, or working age population would be better. Working age population. So these are all the people who are eligible to work. They're all the people who are eligible to work, like they can work, right? There's no problem with them working. And then comes in the third category, which can be defined as retired individuals or, senior citizens, which means that they have already retired. 60 usually is the retirement age in most countries. Retired or senior citizens, right? Does it make sense? Is everyone clear on this? Okay, now moving forward from here, within the category of working age population, you have all the people. No. Above minors are never allowed to work, but I'm saying that in Pakistan, anyone above the age of 14 will not be considered as a minor. That's what I wanted to say. So anyone, minors are never allowed to work, but anyone above the age of 14 is not considered as minor in Pakistan, right? So they are eligible to work, right? And in other countries, that might be slightly different. In some countries, it might be 18 years and so on. Yeah, that is exactly. So that was my point. So that is basically known as child labor. So if anyone below 14, I know a couple of children, Pakistani children below the age of 14 are working, and that is what is illegal, like literally not even unethical. That is completely illegal, and that is subject to legal punishment. That could be fine, that could be imprisonment, and so on and so forth. Right. So these are all the things. Right. Are we good on this? So minor is below the age of 14. Working age population, then in that case, would be anyone above 14, anyone above the age of 14 till 60 years, because after 60 you retire, right? Above 60. Above 60 would be retired citizens and so on. Is everyone clear on this? Are we good on this? Okay, now moving forward from here, working age population is then further divided in two categories. One is labor force, people. Now I'll tell you what exactly is the definition of labor force. Labor force are the people who are willing to work. Now think about this very carefully. First of all, we divided the entire population of a country in three categories. Minors, they're not even eligible to work. Working age population, they're eligible to work. And retired citizens, again, they have retired. So in a way, they're not allowed to work. But some people do keep working, right? But normal idea is that above 60 people will stop working. Now, within working age population, you have two categories: labor force, who are willing to work, right? Who are willing to work. And then another category would be not in labor force, which means that they don't want to work. Now, let me give you some examples. Are you guys above the age of 14? Are you guys above the age of 14? Most probably the answer would be yes. If you're doing your A-levels, normally students do their A-levels when they're 17, 18 years old, right? So you are above the age of 14, but you are not willing to work, right? So what category you belong in? What category do you all belong in? You're not in labor force, right? You're not actively looking for work. Yes or no? Zed, does it make sense? You're not actively looking for work. You don't want to work. Similarly, when you go to universities, by the time normally students graduate from university, they're 22 years old because you complete your A-levels by 18 or 23 years old, whatever, right? But still, till then, you will not be looking for work, right? So you are not in labor force. You are not in labor force, but not that might not be true for everyone, right? Some people start working from early age, right, and so on, right? But mostly students who attend higher universities or universities higher education, they are not in the labor force. Similarly, there can be a couple of other people, let's say housewives or people, even males who are sitting at home, they don't want to work or whatever, right? For whatever XYZ reason, right? So they're not in the labor force. Is everyone clear on this? So anyone who is between the ages of 14 to 60 who are not working for whatever reason, either they are either they are working or they are, they don't want to work or whatever the reason is, right? So all of these people will be not in labor force. Does it sound good? Does this make sense, right? And then within labor force, you have two further categories, because these were all the people who were willing to work. Then not all people who are willing to work actually get jobs. Not all the people who are willing to work will will end up finding a job. So that is why within labor force, you have two further categories, employed and unemployed. So employed are the ones who are lucky to find a job, unemployed are the ones who are not able to find a job. So this is how the entire population of a country is distributed. Now, if there's any question, anything you would want to ask me, more than happy to answer your question. Right? So this was the category that is our area of interest. So why are people unemployed? What are the causes of unemployment, right? What factors cause unemployment? That is what we're about to discuss. So if this is clear, I'll clear the screen so that we can move forward. If there are any questions, I can stay back and answer your questions. Is this simple? Can you move on? Okay. Now think about this, students. Unemployment happens because of a lot of different reasons, right? So if I can ask you all, because obviously you guys are mature enough, and secondly, you are economic students, so by now you would have some perspective that what causes unemployment. So what are the factors? What are the reasons? What are the bases for people being unemployed? Can you tell me that? Right? So we are about to discuss causes of unemployment, right? So let's see what you have over here. Do you have any other job besides teaching? So I do have a job. So basically, mega lectures, let me tell you, since you have asked me this question, right? So when I was teaching at Moon Academy, I was in the morning, I used to do a consultancy job where I help students, counseling things, right? In simple words, right? So I used to help students with their foreign admissions, which universities to apply to, and blah, blah, blah. And in the evening, I used to teach at noon. This was back when I was with Noon. Now, when I'm at Mega Lecture, so I am working as operation lead at Mega Lecture, which means that all the operations at Mega Lecture, I'm facilitating that, getting teachers onboarded and, then observing their classes and all that stuff. So yeah, that's my main responsibility. So for 8 hours in the morning, I go to our office at National Incubation Center. For those of you who are from Islamabad would know, thank you so much. And in the evening, so that's why I did not overburden myself, because then it would be too much of teaching, which I can't really manage. So I've just decided to take economics, right? No O-levels business, no O-levels economics, no O-levels business, A-levels business, none of that. Right? And I might start, but that depends on the response. So counseling can be a thing at Mega Lecture, and which would be definitely, inshallah, a thing in the future, but not right now, because I would be the only one, and yeah. So that's it. Okay. Now quickly discuss this. So students, it's already a little late. So we'll come back to this question tomorrow, where we talk about what are all the factors. And so we'll also do this, and we'll look at 2 or 3 questions related to Keynesian cross, right? Does this sound good? And what I've done, a quick announcement, that I've already synchronized my folder, the desktop folder, laptop folder, with the Google Drive, which means all the videos automatically get uploaded. And then one of our staff members who's responsible for this, she uploads it on the YouTube, right? So now there should be less delay. There can be delay at some, on some days, but usually it should not be. So tomorrow, sometime after midday, you should expect the video to be available, right? Okay, great. So I'll see you tomorrow at the same time. Take care. Good night, and see you tomorrow. Allah Hafiz.